Our first guest is Joshua Dan, who's a computer scientist and mathematician and the executive director of MetaGov, a decentralized research community of scholars from a wide variety of fields, researching and building tooling for governance, for the governance of our digital pluriverse, let's say. Josia is here today to present about one of the numerous initiatives in MetaGov called DAOstar, which is focused on a DAO standard for membership and search. So Joshua, want to share a bit about MetaGov first in general before going into DAOstar?
Yeah, sure. Hi, folks. Thanks for having me here. Yeah, MetaGov is a nonprofit, as Fotis mentioned, that builds standards and infrastructure for online governance. So we work with a lot of different entities, from online games to social networks to DAOs and blockchains in particular, to basically improve self-governance in those communities, or to at least make it possible for those communities to govern themselves, to build their own institutions, which is what, of course, brought us to the DAO space, because it's really just a wonderful group of people who are all extremely engaged and interested in building those institutions, building new forms of governance on the internet.
It seems like you have amassed a great team of people, very interesting scholars.
Yeah, I'm by far the least qualified person there. So
don't be too hard on yourself, Joshua. So with that out of the way, we can go into DAOstar.
Okay, I guess
you have some slides.
Maybe I should. Yeah, I'll share my slides.
All right.
1 second. All right. All right. Hopefully you guys, folks, can see this.
Good.
All right, wonderful. Well, let's get this party started. Thanks again for having me here. I'm Josh from MetaGov. And the future of DAOs is fragile. Use cases are immature, and as we all know, business models are, let's say, optimistically still being tested. 4 years of competition and experimentation in this ecosystem have led to, well, fragmentation and a lot of uncertainty. Another way of putting it is that DAOs are far, far from challenging the Death Stars of Web 2. That's why, as part of DAOstar, this organization, we've assembled an alliance of over 70 key organizations in the DAO ecosystem to build new interoperable standards for all DAOs. Now, this group of DAO builders and developers includes folks like Moloch, Gnosis, Aragon, Compound, Snapshot, Gitcoin, Orca, OpenZeppelin, and a bunch of others that you see there. And we've been working intensely for the past several months to produce the DAOstar standard, namely EIP 4824, an API standard for DAOs. What is that exactly? So for developers, DAOstar specifies a DAO URI and a JSON LD schema akin to token URI for NFTs. And we all know how token URI is actually incredibly useful for producing and allowing people to actually interact with NFTs. Now, almost all DAOs already publish the data off-chain for a variety of different reasons. And honestly, as part of my job, I learn more reasons every day. But this standard specifies a consistent way to do that, to publish that data following existing best practices. For DAO creators, upgrading to DAOstar means that your DAO will be easier to discover through aggregators like DeepDAO, Masari, or Etherscan, more legible to potential and current members, and ultimately more compatible with tooling like Snapshot, Tally, Disco, or Govern, whose founders all were very active in the development of the DAOstar standards. And just to show you that it's not all talk, so some key contributors from Moloch Mystics and MetaGov recently put together a live reference invitation for Moloch v3. So there's actual data coming in and out. And we're working with folks from Aragon and DAO to produce subgraphs and additional reference implementations for Aragon DAOs and for Gnosis Safes. But maybe you might have a question like, what are the use cases? Oh, it's nice to talk about interoperability and data publishing. So I want to share here a practical preview what something like EIP 4824 actually enables and why interoperability is important. So the example involves actually a new working paper that we are close to publishing. And I would just encourage you to go to DAOstar.org or DAOstar.one. That's O-N-E. And you can see a preview of this new working paper. But long story short, what it does is it builds an attestation framework on top of EIP 4824. And what this framework allows you to do is it enables kind of like a very typical use cases like Web3 profiles and CVs in an interoperable way that connects all the different Web3 profile and CV services that are starting to come around. So how does that work? So effectively what we do is we extend EIP 4824 with schemas and models for this key use case of Web3 CVs. If you understand like what attestations are and what like EIP 4824 is actually doing, essentially what EIP 4824 is doing is saying like DAOs should be able to publish attestations about their own membership or their own sort of like data about themselves, right? So these are attestations coming from the DAO. For a given member of a DAO, they may be interested in publishing, information about themselves. Like, this is what I did at the DAO. This is how I participated. This is how I participated across a number of different DAOs, right? So this is traditionally how we think about a CV. A CV is just a certain kind of self-attestation. Now, there are also issuer attestations. This is a special class where, maybe it's some sort of third party, like Disco or Govern or Tally or even Snapshot that are publishing information about the DAOs, but also about like how will the members interact with DAOs, right? These are usually trusted services, usually by the DAOs themselves, but like, how do we know that the DAO actually trusts them or this is the right thing? Like this becomes a kind of a question that we would like to be able to verify or attest to. And finally, there are peer attestations. So these are attestations where you're in a DAO and other people, let's say like you're in a coordinate of some sort, right? And other people, your peers in the DAO, are attesting to your performance, to your contributions, or to just other things about you, right? So these are 4 common models for attestations. And what the new working paper does is it organizes them and synthesizes them and tries to deal with the fact that, underlying all this, there's like tons of different DAOs, tons of different third-party issuers, and tons of different identity services that need to be sort of like integrated for all of them. So this is but the point is all the attestations need to be unified in order to produce something like a consistent Web3 CV that will sort of follow you across all these different services. So anyways, that gives you kind of hopefully one practical use case for how EIP 4824 / the DAOstar standards being used currently. And I'll just mention that a group of us, I don't know if anybody is in New York City for NFT NYC and DAO NYC, but a group of us from Avenue, Govern, Disco, Moloch Mystics, and Metagov are meeting this week in New York City to go over some of the initial experiments for this. So if you are in New York City, please find us and love to chat. So lastly, just go on about the upgrade process. So upgrading is designed to be as easy as possible. So if you have an existing DAO, what we've done in this standard is we've specified an API manager contract, which is kind of reminiscent of mutable NFTs that you can deploy. And we're building in a factory contract that you can call with your DAO to deploy this API manager contract. The point is you'll be able to, like, with your DAO contract, interact with this API manager, this factory contract, and it'll automatically take care of everything. Eventually, in the future, what we're hoping to do is work with existing DAO frameworks to deploy DAOstar, these DAOstar contracts or API manager contracts automatically whenever a new DAO is deployed. So it's essentially just you roll a new DAO, and it just comes with all this extra interface that allows you to deploy this API, deploys this API for you, and automatically kind of like auto integrates things like Tally or Snapshot or Oracle or services that need to be built on top of an API, and also automatically distributes your information or publishes the DAO to services like Masari and Etherscan and DeepDAO. Once again, things that require some sort of API interaction. So yeah, that's basically the end of the presentation. If you're interested in adopting the DAOstar standard or joining the roundtable, just come talk to us. I'm Josh at metagov.org. You can also there are a bunch of forums, kind of ways of interacting at DAOstar.org. We also have grant opportunities, and this is a good reminder to myself to thank our many, many different funders who are making this possible, including the Ethereum Foundation, Radical, Gnosis DAO, Aragon, Metacartel Ventures, Near, Moloch DAO, and Gitcoin for their support. We have an dedicated engineering team to help you onboard into this and to kind of explore with you how, what are the use cases for publishing data for a given DAO. And finally, just help us, join us on these community calls. They happen every Thursday or every other Thursday to build public goods and sort of interoperable standards for the entire ecosystem. And with that, that is the end of my presentation. Thanks, folks.
Thank you, Josh. This is right off the bat something very valuable as a contribution to this space, and it's something that was, especially for organizations and individuals who have been around DAOs, who have been in these bridges, connecting them, trying to formalize them, and even trying to legitimize the DAO as an entity, as an organizational entity that can have the legal standards that a traditional business has, or even to actually make it philosophically, let's say, an entity. This is, I think, a step towards that direction. And I was also reminded right now of something you said, well, in Amsterdam, in the roundtable about open problems in DAO science. And there was a problem that you brought up about, and I'm paraphrasing you. It's probably something along the lines of how could I airdrop a token in every DAO in existence? And this stuck to me because it seems like doesn't seem very deep at first, but the more you think about it, it's a very foundational problem. And would you say that the development of the DAO standard resolves this problem? And what would needs to be done in order to go towards that direction?
Yeah, so on this problem specifically, so this kind of question came up in the kind of roundtable, in these kind of discussions, because we're thinking, how do we kind of incentivize people to adopt this standard and actually publish this data? And one of the thought ideas is like, oh, maybe you just like airdrop something. This is a very common tool in our ecosystem. We're probably not going to do that, but still, like, it results produces like a really interesting question, right? For us, in terms of like, okay, let me respond kind of like to a couple of sort of the things you brought up. One is like around this like question of legitimacy, and to us, like that's very much a matter of like, is really tied to this question of legibility. And sort of the use cases for this initial, for like EIP 4824, not even talking about the attestations framework that I recently kind of like just went into, but just originally like EIP 24, it was entirely to make DAOs more discoverable and more legible. And this is incredibly important. Just like something that like gets mentioned to me all the time is that there are investors out there who are thinking of like investing into these DAOs, or investing in the teams that are building them, or investing directly into the tokens. And the problem for them is like they have no idea what is going on inside these DAOs. It's right. It's really hard to see inside, these entities, and sort of say, hey, I want to participate, or I want to sort of put money in there, right? So this applies to both investors and to sort of potential members. And the point of this EIP, or this, this standard, is to help DAOs make themselves more transparent, if they want to. Obviously, this is all voluntary, but have a consistent way so they can say, hey, this is what I'm actually doing. This is how my governance works. This is my membership. This is my some sort of marker of my activity, right? That this just doesn't really exist right now. You can see that for different services trying to do what they can to sort of deal with the volume of DAOs that are coming in online all the time and try to publish some information there. But it's a very ad hoc process, and it's often only supports specific frameworks, or different frameworks support their own UIs. So Compound has a bunch of supporters, but it's the same true for things like One Hive Gardens. I don't know. And the point here is that try to make all that tooling and all that legibility more accessible. And as part of that, of making things more legible, is of course if we know that the DAO exists, we can actually airdrop them a token. And this gets kind of complicated because it's kind of hard sometimes to tell the difference between just a regular old smart contract and a DAO. Or another way of saying this is that many smart contracts that don't look anything like the factory contracts that we're used to, like Gnosis Safes or Aragon DAOs or Moloch DAOs, they actually can be DAOs. I work with very custom one-off DAOs all the time that are really most of the code is dedicated to supporting some maybe NFT process or some DeFi thing, but then there's sort of this governance piece attached to it that makes it effectively into a DAO, right? So how do you find all these? And I think the way we sort of come down to this is make the interface truly as minimal as possible. Just have them okay, these contracts, all they need to do is interact with this API managed contract. It'll publish this thing. Hopefully the contract will be indexed, so you can just see where all the DAOs that are sort of publishing data and publishing themselves as DAOs. And then essentially it's a kind of a voluntary buy-in framework for sort of annotating whether you're a DAO or not. And once you have that index, you can airdrop them because you have the contracts. Anyways, that's long convoluted answer. And it gets actually even more complicated if you actually think the mechanics of getting this airdrop together and verifying things. But yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I can imagine how it can get very complicated, and it's the start of a whole research program, you could say, on DAO attestations and verifiability, and giving them a status that they exist. And one thing that came to my mind, and it's I think an issue. I don't know if you have tackled with this issue, is the death of a DAO, let's say, or the an organization stopping to exist or stopping its operations. Is this accounted in the API itself, or is it something external that has to be adjusted by the DAO standard that its DAO adheres to, like Moloch or DAOs?
Yeah. Actually, this is something that currently DAOstar has really been focused on developing this API standard, because it's essentially we got together all the frameworks, Compound, Aragon, Gnosis, Moloch, Tribute, etc. And the thing that everybody said that we all needed was this kind of API standard, because it's something that was very annoying. There are all these common names, and DAOs need to do this, right? And we've so far not really tried to impose standards on the contracts themselves, because there's just so much variation in DAOs right now, and it's hard to I think there's a lot of innovation and experimentation that still needs to happen before we get to the point where we're really standardizing a lot of this. But I do think actually this could be quite exciting to sort of come together as an ecosystem and come up with for any given DAO or any given framework, you should include a death clause or some sort of death function, or just some ability to I'm gonna get rid of all the money, exit the members, and close this DAO. Because I don't know if you're familiar with the practice of ending a company suppose a company, you start a company, like you're building widgets, and for whatever reason, people don't really want to buy your widgets. And then you have all this stuff that you built, IP, things like that, and that's all with the company. But how do you end this company? It's actually quite complicated, and they're you need to get special lawyers involved, and it's on top of not having a successful company, you need to spend 6 months of your life ending this thing and winding it down. And yes, we could definitely do that better, and find a kind of more automated, interoperable way of just saying this is a standard way of winding down a DAO, which I think would be great.
Yeah, yes. So winding down a DAO specifically would be way easier because of the lack of bureaucracy involved. I don't know if that's going to change, and I don't know how much this is a part of the actual. And I don't know in a traditional sense, in traditional business, I don't know how much this is of a factor that makes it so complicated to end a business as a legal entity. But yeah, I guess.
Well, it kind of has to do with the ownership and the processes, right? X is owned by a company, but you might have existing contracts with other entities that there are obligations entailed there. There's the actual sort of act of dissolution, which is something needs to be maybe registered with the state, right? So these are some of the reasons why it's complicated. Yeah, they are simpler in DAOs, potentially, but not if it's just there's no contract, there's no function there for actually winding it down, right? It's a lot of DAOs you see today are just intended oh, these are going to just run forever on the chain, and it gets kind of complicated about what happens to this. It's still an active contract, but we're erasing it, or even we're just migrating from this contract to something else, right? There's there are sort of patterns for these kind of contract upgrades or migrations that people are still this is one of the earliest things. So last October that we started talking about, which is people were asking, we were discussing prioritization in terms of what should go into the standard. And one of the things that was fairly high up was just migration patterns for DAOs, as in if you want to go to not just a new contract, but maybe you want to switch frameworks, right? How does that work? How do you go from, let's say, a Gnosis Safe to a Tribute DAO, or go from Compound to, I don't know, for whatever reason, you might want to devolve down to a Gnosis Safe or something like that, right? You can see these are one example of these DAO to DAO interactions, migrations, that people have been talking to about for a while. And one of the things that people who are listening to this might be interested in checking out the recording from ETH Denver / Shelling Point, in which Isaac, who's one of the sort of key authors of the IP, was talking about his experience, manipulating or setting up these DAO interactions between Moloch DAOs and Gnosis Safes using kind of this minion framework.
Yeah, the issue of migration is probably something that has been very problematic for a lot of organizations. And in metagame, we have faced it too when we wanted to spin up Polygon Safe, for example, and actually change the frameworks that we were registered as a DAO before, and had to go through all this complicated processes. It's certainly something where there's not a predefined flow that helps people, that helps the struggle of migration. And speaking of metagame and our organization, I don't know if you're familiar with the product / platform that we're building, MyMeta, which aims to be like a sort of decentralized LinkedIn, where it is data rich and it's based on decentralized identities and profiles, where you can state your skills, state previous experience, and also be able to find other people who have have some similarity with your own background and your own skills and your own personality even. And the issue of DAO membership, because it's something that we try to showcase on a platform, has been a very important issue. It has been very hard to actually showcase DAO membership, and it seems like DAOstar is like setting us free from these concerns, and it's probably the solution we have been looking for. So that's very interesting.
Yeah, this is I didn't not heard of this before, but this is amazing. I love it. And I'll just say, yeah. So, what makes we actually support a lot of folks that are, there are a lot of companies right now trying to build essentially this version of Web3 profiles and CVs, and a lot of communities. Obviously, Metagame trying to do it for themselves. And there are we have a very fast growing Telegram chat where we're basically, there's a working group that's focused specifically on this. Everybody's trying to build some version of Web3 CVs, but they all need to essentially consume the same data, but they should be, right? So DAOstar, that's exactly what DAOstar is kind of there to do, to enable them to consume similar pools of data as well as each other's data in a kind of consistent way, so that we can support better versions of all these, you describe it as kind of like LinkedIn, but a not boring LinkedIn, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's how we sell it.
Yes. Yeah, you guys should join the Telegram.
What's the Telegram called?
It's called Voyager Identity. I'll post it at the chat. But yeah, I would say just maybe a question for you guys.
Sorry, just to know, you can also go to our Discord server, and there's a channel where you can share all these links, all these cool links that you have with us.
Absolutely. What I'll do is maybe one question I have for all the folks in Metagame that might be listening to this or watching this is, what kind of data does Metagame itself want to publish, right? So this is something I've been trying to figure out, because as far as DAOstar, we interact with a lot of DAO tooling companies, right? People trying to build services for DAOs, as well as many of them are also DAOs themselves, right? Like Metagame. The thing that we wanted to sort of learn more about is given where DAOs are now, and maybe a little bit where they want to be, what kind of data do they want to publish, right? Because I know what the DAO tooling companies want the DAOs to publish, right? But what do the DAOs themselves want to publish? And this is kind of an open question for everybody listening in. I'd love to hear your responses or ideas, whether in the chat or just message me at josh@metagov.org, and love to sort of start a conversation there.
This issue, yeah, this is definitely something that we have been thinking ourselves, because there are the infrastructure is there for being able to store a great amount of data and to actually have it be more permanent through Ceramic Network and Arwave and Web3 storage and all this cool tooling. But yeah, the big issue is what do you want to know about people and how to connect them? So yeah, this is probably a conversation that can keep on going, and probably something that with 30 minutes won't do justice to it. So thank you, Joshua, for letting us know of this tool that we all need, basically.
Thanks for having me.